Hey everyone, Ray here. Here's another Talk History episode. This one is with Jamie Redfern of the History of Hannibal series. You should definitely check out his podcast. We were able to get in some serious history in this episode. We also went off on some tangents. Don't ask me how Buddy Epson got involved, but he did, but we handled it professionally. Anyway, it's been brought to my attention that I did a rather dodgy job of describing my latest Audible recommendation. So I would like to take another crack at it, please. So it's early 1941. Lay Force, which is a special operations unit within the British military, is being disbanded. Mostly because the Royal Navy, in between taking on the Italians, dealing with the German U-boats that come in and trying to protect their own possessions, simply don't have the means to shuttle around the special forces units to get behind enemy lines to cause the appropriate trouble and harassment. But one of their numbers, David Sterling, thinks to himself, no, this is a good idea. We just have to find another way to make it work. So he goes to Middle East Command, and even that is a story in itself on how he's able to secure permission, but I'll leave that to you in the book. You'll really enjoy it. So he gets it going. The men train. He selects his men. They start training, and they're about to have their first operation. And because of the weather, mostly, and some other factors, it's a complete disaster. He loses more than half of his men on the first operation. They're either killed or captured. And he knows that the plug on this can be pulled at any second, especially with those kinds of results. So he, without directly asking permission, attaches himself to a unit that will give him some supplies, and they start up again, obviously with a much smaller group. They've learned a lot. They're very careful, and they have some amazing results. And of course, then it's safe to go back to Middle East Command and ask for some more men. But it's an amazing story. They do a lot of damage to the Germans and the Italians, and just their bravado, whatever you want to call it. They were truly courageous men. I could never see myself doing anything like that. But going through the story, you will learn a lot about the British military. You learn a lot about the German military, the situation in the desert. It will cover a lot of details that I will probably miss in the next whatever episodes. You'll also learn about special forces, the explosions that they were able to create and come up with, and just different ways to sabotage. But the most interesting thing I learned was just literally life in the desert, how it didn't take a lot of mistakes for you to die. I mean, it was just so hot, and you needed water and supplies all the time. But it's even worse than what you think it would possibly be, trying to live there or work there or both. So you should definitely check it out. Go to my website, WWII.podcast.net. Click on the Audible link and check it out, or get something else. But I guarantee you, if you get this book, you will be amazed at the trouble he and his men, David Sterling, were able to give Rommel, and they deserve a lot of credit. So I hope this description did a lot better job than the first one. It's very painful to be called dodgy by one of your British listeners. So I hope I have made amends. And now here's my talk history with Jamie Redfern. Greetings, everyone, from a beautiful day in Central Virginia. Here's another Talk History. This time we have Jamie Redfern from the History of Hannibal with us today, and he's going to spend some time with us. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Ray. So, I speak to you here from rainy Britain when it's dark and miserable.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. So I know it's late there, and I know you're a busy man, so I really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you. So
I always wanted to say that. Okay. My pleasure.
Well, you got your chance. So why don't you take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself and your podcast?
Well, as Ray said, I create the podcast A History of Hannibal, which is obviously a biography of Hannibal. We're covering detail of his life and the Punic Wars. We're currently up to the Siege of Saguntum. I wrote the script for episode 18 today, and it's a lot of fun to listen to, I presume. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, and where are you from exactly?
I am from the Manchester in the United Kingdom, Northern England, for those of you who know nothing about the geography of England.
Do you find an excuse to weave your favorite soccer team into your episodes, or is that just a David Crowther thing?
Oh, I always do. what was it? I think I've done it twice recently. Once I was talking about how miserable it is to be thinking you're going to win and then lose.
Right.
Which, I compared that to being stabbed in the back, so I mentioned a recent loss to my beloved Manchester City from Real Madrid. And I also threw in, I don't even know why I did it, I can't remember, something about famous commentary lines.
Right.
And I ended up, because there's the famous, at least for people in England, the 1966 World Cup final, they think it's all over, it is now, which I compared to how Manchester City won the title last year with the infamous Aguero line, as we won the title in the last seconds of the season. Oh, yes.
Very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
One day I hope to comprehend the passion that you have for the game, but for right now I just kind of sit back and wish I cared that much for anything, but that's a whole nother story. So what would you like to talk about today?
Well, right, I would like to talk with you and let your listeners listen with us talking about World War II.
That's a good idea.
That's a good idea. I think they'll like that.
Yeah, I don't know anything else, so let's go with that.
Okay. Since you've been talking about the war in the desert quite recently, why don't we start with that?
Okay.
Something you said in episode 61, which I thought was quite interesting, about Franco being involved in North Africa and him wanting to take some of Algeria, but Hitler not wanting that. Why did Hitler not want Franco to be involved in North Africa?
Right, yeah. Hitler was playing a very delicate balancing game. He wanted to give Franco something to get him in the war, the way he kind of wooed Mussolini into it, but at the same time, he needed France to pretty much accept his already harsh terms for his armistice, and if he'd pushed it any further, they might have fought on. They would have lost, but it would have taken time and troops and stuff like that. And he just didn't have the time to deal with that because he had to go work on Britain. And he was also trying to convince Britain at the same time by supposedly taking it easy on France that he really didn't want war. This could be the end of it. Just let's go to the table and talk. So he thought he was going to be able to impress France and Britain at the same time. And as we know now, it only worked on one, but it didn't work on the other. So he had to tread very lightly until he knew what Britain was going to do.
Ah, right. That is very interesting. So he was focusing on the general picture rather than how best to win North Africa.
Right. He's looking at the big map. Until he gets obsessed with Russia, he keeps his eye on the bigger map of Europe, and he's just got to be very careful until he knows exactly what he's dealing with.
Do you think that looking at the Big Mac, he's a big McDonald's fan, Hitler was. Looking at the big map, do you think that that is one of the reasons why the Axis were not successful in North Africa eventually?
Well, there are so many reasons. One, when you have a partnership with someone and you don't communicate very effectively and you don't really trust each other, and one side is a lot weaker, less martial than the other, and they're to be honest with you, for the Italians, their spirit just was not in it. That kind of thing. And in episode 62, that's going to come out in a couple of days, I give more specific, detailed explanations when I say Italy was weak militarily, but they just didn't talk to each other. The left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. The people of the Middle East didn't really mind the Germans so much because the Germans never talked about coming in and conquering, but Mussolini did, and they were partners. So that was just another way that Mussolini hurt Hitler and his interests.
So the imperialism of Italy kind of turned people away from Germany.
Exactly. They're like, we don't mind Germany. If Germany beats up on Britain, maybe we can all have our independence and, our resources back and stuff like that. But if Germany is going to be hand in hand with Mussolini, and Mussolini has made it clear exactly what he wants an African and Middle Eastern empire, then they weren't going to be on board. And they could have, the people of the Arabs in the Middle East could have really have helped the Axis by making the life of the British troops there and all their positions there. They could have made it a lot more complicated, but they didn't, because they didn't trust the Italians and they didn't trust the Germans who were supporting them.
That's very interesting stuff there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Because I know that in a few cases which I've looked at in some detail around that period, about how Britain's imperialism had turned countries away. Like, you go back to World War One,
right?
About British interests in the area, like in Egypt, had kind of persuaded Turkey to drift more towards the Axis, the Central Powers,
right,
as they were back in the day. Yeah,
it's just you got to play the game very delicately. You got to consider all the players on the field, and sometimes when you make a mistake, you push someone into your enemy's camp, and then you have to deal with that. And Hitler was just very cognizant of that. He, just like everyone else at the time, had studied World War I in great detail, and he was just trying not to repeat those mistakes. And he was doing pretty well until he opens up the second front, and then of course, that's the biggest mistake he could have made. But up until then, he was doing a rather decent job of avoiding mistakes like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the biggest lesson from history, or the second biggest lesson from history, is never invade Russia, because you will be doomed
exactly
to freeze to death.
Exactly.
The biggest lesson in history being that no one learns from history, obviously.
That's very well put. Yeah, and it's just like Hitler thought he was, when he did get to Russia, he thought he would be able to take it out pretty quickly, but he lost 6 weeks going into Greece trying to clean up another Italian mistake. And so, would those 6 weeks have made a big difference? Who knows? But we'll never know, because he could have, been closer to the gates of the cities that he was at 6 weeks earlier if he didn't have to clean up another Italian mistake.
The Italians seem to have been a bit trigger happy, if you want to, like getting involved in things that they shouldn't have been getting involved with.
Yeah, what confuses me is that Mussolini almost seems to be the only person in the country who wants war, and everybody else is like, well, we want territory, we want kind of it given to us, or maybe we can just bluff and bluster our way through and be handed territory, but we're not willing to fight and die for it. And Hitler was not only willing to sacrifice many of his men, but he literally thought he was changing and reshaping the world and saving it from all the things that he considered evil. So there was no sacrifice too great. Whereas the Italians were like, well, we're in on this, but only if it's going to be really easy. We're going to get a lot out of it. And, don't ask too much of us. And the Germans asked too much of them. So it all fell apart. And then it didn't take very long to fall apart. And it did.
Did people at the time realise that Italy wasn't in that strong a position, even though it sometimes acted like it was?
Well, the devil's in the details, and I cover this in great detail in episode 62. But what happens is Italy does have a very large modern fleet in the Mediterranean, and they do have a very large modern air force. But it took them a very long time to build all that stuff because their industrial base wasn't very strong, it wasn't very large. So any losses that they suffer, they're not going to be able to recoup. And so because of that, they don't really want to fight and lose these ships or these planes because they know they're not going to have any more. And their philosophy was, we're just going to have a fleet that's so big, we're not going to have to use it. It's called a fleet in being philosophy. And we're just it's going to be so big, no one's going to mess with us. And it comes down to Britain going, okay, we either surrender, we accept your premise, we can't beat your fleet because it's so big, or we fight on. And because they chose to fight, they pretty much negated the Italians' entire naval philosophy with one stroke, and it took them some time to fight and win. But because they fought, they literally called Italy's bluff. Italy wasn't willing to stay in the game, and they just got defeated within 2.5 years, something like that.
Listening to you talk about that, it sounds a lot like the strategy the Persians used to have back in the day. I looked at this in my other podcast, which was about Alexander the Great.
Right.
And their strategy was to have a huge army, which it wasn't actually very good. They were just full of like peasants who didn't really know how to fight. But if they had a big enough army, they could just scare the enemy into running away and win without having to fight a battle. And then once they actually fought people who were competent like the Greeks, it all fell apart and their empire was gone.
I love that sound. The sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. What are you waiting for? Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big business. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. I love how Shopify has the tools and resources to make it easy for any business to succeed from down the street to around the globe. Shopify powers millions of businesses from first sale to full scale. Reach customers online and across social networks with an ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. Gain insights as you grow with detailed reporting of conversion rates, profit margins, and beyond. More than a store, Shopify grows with you. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/World War II, all lowercase, for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/World War II right now. Shopify.com/World War II. Yeah, when it works, it's wonderful. When it doesn't, you find out exactly that having a whole bunch of peasants with sticks doesn't match up to a trained professional army, and that's what they do for a living. They're not just pulled, they'll be doing it for the next 20 or 30 years or whatever until they retire, and it makes a huge difference. It's all about training, and that's what the British did in the desert. They trained, and so when finally they got their chance, until Rommel comes onto the scene, they were able to handle the Italians very effectively.
Mm-hmm. Though I just would like to say to all of my Italian listeners that I am not comparing you to peasants with sticks.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely no. I was in Rome for 11 days for my honeymoon, and even if it hadn't been my honeymoon, the city's beautiful, the people were wonderful, and I mean, if you have to live someplace, Rome is definitely the place to be. And it's okay. Maybe it's okay not to be the fiercest, meanest warriors on the planet, and but of course, no disrespect to any Italians listening at all.
Who cares about how good your military is when you have panem et circuses?
Exactly. So let me ask you.
And nice weather.
Exactly. It was beautiful there. So let me ask you a question, and you can choose either side, the Axis or the Allies. But what do you think, or how do you think Hannibal would have done if he had been on one side or the other in 1940?
Oh, that's a very interesting question there, Ray.
Thank you.
Yes, it was very clever of you for coming up with that, considering I do Hannibal. It's a podcast. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
I would say fairly well. I would place him as one of the greatest generals ever, if not the greatest. I mean, some of his tactical decisions, like the envelopment of the Romans at Cannae, it was still being used, that basic tactic, in the Gulf War in the 90s.
Wow.
So I'm sure it'd have had great success.
Yeah, because I remember Schieffelin from World War I, who was just a huge fan of Hannibal and used his tactics when he was coming up with his plan. So you're right. I mean, thousands of years later, his tactics were still around, still working, and that's pretty much the true definition of success if it still works, 2,000 years later.
I think he would have probably fared at his best, perhaps, fighting for the Germans against the Russians.
Right. Because he had all the open space and he could maneuver and use different tactics and that kind of thing?
Yes, he'd be able to use he was brilliant at using the terrain to his advantage, which I think the Russians had the advantage of that, and perhaps he could have turned the tide. And his very well-disciplined troops against the more numerous Romans is comparable probably to the strong German army against the more numerous Russians, because that's Russia's great strength, is its huge manpower. It can throw millions of troops at you, and when you kill them, it can send millions more flooding from the east in a great red tide enveloping the land. I'm getting very poetic there.
That's fine. We encourage poetry on this podcast. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised by your answer. I just assumed Rome, Carthage, North Africa, that you were going to say either the British or the Italians in North Africa. But you're right. I mean, he's in Russia. If he knows the land, he can use it, and he would need to know the land in order to use it to wipe out a superior enemy as far as numbers go.
Now, that would have probably been a good idea to suggest the land he is actually familiar with.
Right.
And even though I did obviously think about the possibility of you asking that question, and I have given detailed responses, I decided to do a bit of improvisation there.
Well, I was impressed.
Thank you. It shows off my flexibility in arguing points that I don't necessarily agree with.
Good for
even
you.
Though I do agree with it.
You got to stay on your toes, and that's pretty good considering it's past 10 o'clock at night where you're at. Very well done.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
So, if we want to get back to the Middle East, which is what we started off with.
Yes, please.
An aspect of the war I'm very interested in is the war in Iraq. No, not Iraq, Iran. Because something you've covered in your podcast is the importance of the Suez Canal.
Right.
And the role of that in keeping the Middle East open. And Iran was very important for its oil fields, which the British had a vested interest in with the Perso-Anglian, Perso-British, Brito-Persian oil, the Anglo-Persian oil company.
Right.
Which later became BP. And its usefulness in supplying the Russians, which led, of course, to the 1941 invasion of Tehran by the Soviets to keep that path forward, because the Persians, fearing the British imperialism in the area, were quite pro-Hitler and Germany. So I'm quite interested in thinking, how are you going to cover that period?
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
Yeah, in September 1941, even though we haven't gotten there yet, it's the British and the Russians that go in, because the leader of Iran, formerly Persia, he asked everybody to call it Iran. He did a very good job on a number of fronts. He back before the war starts, he's able to bring in a lot of different specialists from the different countries, and he's able to play off the different countries, the leaders against each other, and he gets a lot of good things for Iran. He brings them into the modern age, improves communications, transportations, that kind of thing, and he does a good job of balancing them out. But however, he, just like everyone else, gets caught up in the tension in the mid to late 1930s, and just like everyone else, he doesn't know who's going to win. And of course, he's not a big fan of the British because they've been there and they're taking their oil, and so I think it's...
It was pesky British. I've never liked them.
Exactly. No reason you should. I think it's early or mid 1941 when he closes off the use of railroads to the Allies, and of course everybody's trying to get supplies to Russia to keep them in the war against Germany, because we desperately need their help, because we're not on the continent yet, neither is the British. So at that point the British and the Soviets have to do something, so they invade, they take over, and the British, being very British, ask him nicely to step down and to let his son rule in his place. And of course, he has no choice, so he says yes. But I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to cover that yet because I don't know enough of the details. But I'll probably just incorporate it into the overall Eastern Front, and when Russia's like barely hanging on and they need all the supplies they can get from the U.S., from Britain, that kind of thing. So I'll probably just hopefully find a very clever way to weave all that in and just make it part of the narrative, because it is an amazing story, but I just want to give it as much detail as I can, but at the same time, keep the story going.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting detail in there in all these little countries. Well, it's a huge country, but in how all these not to offend any of my Iranian listeners,
exactly,
but the not so important countries in the war, but you can get lost in the weeds.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But sometimes you don't realize how many different countries it did affect. You just think about, Europe, Western Europe, that kind of thing, and then Russia. But no, it affected a lot of different countries, and it changed the world. And we're still dealing with the changes today, which is one of the reasons I'm trying to tell the story, because the results of World War II are still very much with us today.
I think the leader of Persia who they forced to abdicate, Reza Shah, he was quite an interesting character with his westernising of Persia. I think one of my favourite things that he did, the thing I find the most funny, is that he made it illegal for men to wear any other headwear than the bowler hat, because people in the West wore bowler hats, so that must be the right way to get things done. That's quite a crazy thing. Do you know any crazy things that happened in World War II, Ray?
Well, first, I'm still trying to get over that one, because I think that's just a good, sensible law for every country, even today. But actually, what I plan on doing is probably doing an episode or two of just very strange facts about World War II, which there are probably thousands of them. I think I'll save my answer for one of those episodes just so I can build it up. But yeah, it's things like that. And I do plan on going into his earlier life and what he did before the war, because he transformed that country, and he did it juggling many hats, no pun intended. And it's a really interesting story, and I can't wait to go into that one and give it a lot of detail. He was an amazing man. He just kind of bet on the wrong side, and he had his reasons, but he, like others, bet on the wrong side and had to pay the price for it.
The thing I think I find a lot about history when you're writing it is that how much good stuff there is that you have to leave out because you're telling your story. And I just want to go off on all these crazy tangents. That doesn't stop me, of course. I still like to go on my crazy tangents.
You go right ahead.
But I think deep down, if every historian had the time, they'd probably want to just write a history of every single thing that happened.
Yeah, because I'll literally write an episode, and it will be 20 pages, and that's, oh my God, it's just over 2 hours of recording. There's no way I want to do that, or anybody wants to listen to that. So you have to edit it down. It gets edited down, and then suddenly you're telling kind of the highlights. And you just have to, and I'm sure you've run into this. You just have to decide what stays in and what doesn't make it in. And you feel really bad. You're glad that you've gained that knowledge, but you're not sharing it, and you feel kind of bad. But you got to keep the story going. The show must go on.
Oh yeah, I mean, even if it's something as simple as, because I don't want to get too bogged down in the weeds, of just saying, oh, so this consul did that, and I want to get into their name, who they were, but you just have to keep on going. We should just get stuck down in everything.
But
I feel very guilty towards those people.
Right.
Strangely enough, I feel really bad about that person who lived 2,500 years ago because I didn't mention their name in my podcast.
I'm sorry to you and your family line that I didn't give you an extra 15 seconds in my podcast. I feel really bad right now. That's the way it is, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. You were slightly less important than this almost anonymous person, so they're going to get a name.
You almost made it. I wrote you down, but you didn't make it into the recording, so I'm terribly sorry.
You are the person I cast as the Tin Man, but had to leave because they were allergic to the paint that used in the costume.
Exactly. Someone's got to go, and you're it.
I wonder if anyone will get that reference to the Wizard of Oz film about this guy who had to leave because he was allergic to the makeup.
It was the actor from Beverly Hillbillies.
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
I can't remember his name.
Me neither. Oh my God! But it's right there. But yeah, he had a reaction and he lost out. Oh, now you're going to Google it, aren't you?
I am. I'm stuck with Beverly Hills. Beverly Hill Koala Chihuahua.
There you go. I'm looking right at him. He just had that home charm, intelligence, and way of life.
Buddy Ebsen.
There we go, Buddy Ebsen.
Ebsen.
Good man. Okay, that will be on the trivia part of the quiz part of this show.
You see, listeners, you didn't expect this, but you're all going to be quizzed about what we've been talking about. The winner gets a week's vacation at the Maison Harris.
Okay, hey, that's fine. Yeah, you come here and relax. That'll be fine. So some of the things we talked about obviously will be covered in future podcasts, but I promise I'll still go into it and give you all the detail. In some ways, I will act like this episode never happened. Nothing personal, Jamie, but I'll still give everybody all the details. And
I will be one of the forgotten names in history. I just don't make the list.
That's right. You might end up like Buddy Ebsen and get cut, but we'll see how it goes.
I've often been called the Buddy Ebsen of podcasting.
Exactly.
It's my name.
I can't think of anything any higher award than that. The Buddy Ebsen of podcasting. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So how much? And don't take this the wrong way because it sounds bad now that I'm saying it out loud. But so how much longer do you think Hannibal will be around? And do you have plans for any other podcasts, or you're just enjoying yourself back in his world?
I am always one to think towards the future, and I do have plans on what to do. I've got no idea how long Hannibal is going to last.
Okay.
Because I think by this stage I'm at episode 18, right. And I had plans to be at this point by about episode 5. So I'm going way, way over on everything because I do love to get caught up in the weeds.
That's a good sign. I'm sure your listeners are very happy with that.
I think it's probably going to be another 50 episodes or so. So I'll probably be doing this for another year or so until I finish up with Hannibal. And then I'm going to try something a bit different, I think is the plan. This is a world exclusive, by the way.
Exactly. Don't tell anybody. So, but you also have like a normal life, right? You're in school or you have a job or something?
Yeah. Yes, I'm currently a university student doing a degree in ancient history, as well as being a Latin teacher.
Nice.
Which is fun. Latin was the best language. Is it bad that I see French and Italian and Spanish as like mutations of my own perfect language, Latin? And I get really annoyed at the ways they changed it. Because I know it was better back in the Roman days.
Well, as long as you don't correct everyone's speech, I think you'll be fine. How's that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's what we'll do. When I finally cover the Eastern Front, and we've covered the Germans and the Russians going at each other intensely, I'll call you back. We'll drop Hannibal in there somehow, and we'll see how he would have done it. How's that sound?
That sounds like a plan, Ray.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us. You should go to bed now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I have Match of the Day to watch. I need to watch My Beloved City and then sleep.
I understand. You have your priorities set appropriately. Good for you.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, and I look forward to episode 18 of History of Hannibal when it comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And
I look forward to this episode, obviously, and episode 62.
Exactly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, thank you very much, and to everyone, as always, please take care.
Goodbye.